Chapter 6. 1. A devil is born. Mr. Shapiro. We are here, XV, said XXV with the car fully parked whilst looking at the laptop in front of him. This is the place, brother. The place where Big Fish operates from, as divulged by Mr. Johnson. Anders Greylove had taken a moment to break his concentration to quickly glance at his brother, but before long his focus was back on the display. He is an entry-level gangster, and through him we can access the higher-ups. We should demonstrate diligence whilst dealing with him and his crew if we truly desire cooperation, XXV concluded in a calm and explanatory tone. You got a cigarette, XXV? I just ran out. XVine inquired without any acknowledgement of the previous instructive statement while sounding completely disinterested. As he desperately searched his pockets and the car for a fag, XXV once again tore his vision away from the screen, only this time his concentration was fully reserved for his younger sibling. Once locked on, Anders addressed the younger Artifinoid. We can't afford to take this task lightly, XXV stated while overwhelmed by gravitas. He is the stepping stone to quite the potential expansion, brother, but to answer your question, I do not possess any cigarettes on me currently. My apologies, XTAD. Anders finished the sentiment with sincerity, while once again shifting his gaze onto the laptop. Mikolo's concentration, however, was seemingly entirely chartered for the elusive cigarette, as he remained unaffected by his older brother's chiding remark. Well, let's hope that he does then, XX said as the two now found themselves leaving the comfort of the vehicle and began heading towards the shady building, which served as base of operations for the one they called Big Fish. Big Fish, contrary to his name, was not quite the big dog himself, but did act as a middleman to the drug and gun trade orchestrated by the local Crips gang. With all the information gathered on the man, XXV had deemed him a rather significant piece of the puzzle and a window for certain expansion. Big Fish spent most of his time inside the building, which the two brothers now found themselves near. The building itself carried the look of neglect and resembled a factory from the olden days, perhaps an automotive plant, albeit much of the machinery was removed from the perimeter quite some time ago. Big Fish, alongside his crew, were cooped up inside, as it was vital for the members to remain hidden. However, XXV had little difficulty locating this small band of gangbangers. As the two creations were now reaching the main entrance to this building, Anders initiated another interchange. Would you like to know how many men inside? XT, XXV asked, while readily available of providing the answer. I like surprises, XXV, Mikolo answered while slightly chuckling. XXV produced no retort and just simply chose to follow his brother while under the guise of complete silence. This silence, however, was shattered once the two navigated through the main steel gate of the weathered construction. It would be more optimal if I wrap around the back, whilst you distract the members inside from the front, XVII. That way I could get a shot on them should that be necessary, XXV concluded while surveying the back area of this abandoned factory, visualizing his course of attack, so to speak. As you wish, Mr. Clean, XVII responded in jest, slightly mocking his older brother and his bald head. The two proceeded to do just as planned, with XXV rounding the back of the building and XVII utilizing the front entry. Once there, Mikolo burst through the double doors that led into the main factory, making his grand entrance. The gang members were most assuredly located inside the spacious structure, with the first immediate picture being a table which was garnished with playing cards, liquor, and a stereo system. The gangsters were not at all pleased with Mikolo's booming entry, and with no hesitation, in a near instant in fact, opened fire on the unexpected and most assuredly unwanted guest. A storm of lead rained down on the Artifinoid, ranging from AK-47 rounds to handguns of various calibers. The chamber, that just moments prior had been one of relative repose, had quickly become one filled with quite the considerable tumult, as the dissonance produced from the gunfire now commanded the capacious room. XVI, I was down on the ground before this dazzling barrage even had a chance to end. It did come to a conclusion eventually, however, and when that did occur, Big Fish himself started to speak. Who in the fuck is that? Feds or Mafia? Big Fish was drowning in a soup of emotions while speaking, with the main ingredient being perplexity. Shit. I don't know, boss, but the motherfucker is dead, said one of the henchmen while looking up at his boss, who was on the second floor of the factory while the exchange was happening. Not quite, XA retorted, now slowly beginning to rise back up to his feet. You boys really rolled out the red carpet for me over here. Is this how your parents taught you to welcome guests? Mikola Greylove was now speaking while fully upright once again. In a room populated by men carrying the weight of great uncertainty. The fuck! Shouted one of the guards, however, his state of puzzlement was cut rather short as gunfire commenced once again. Only this time it was XXV who was the responsible party. Anders had acquired the perfect spot within the factory and had ambushed the confused gangbangers. One needn't fool themselves, as no better marksman than Anders walked the planet. The Artifinoid was able to take out 5 gang members in just mere seconds, swapping from one target to another, seamlessly registering a headshot on all 5 with a pistol of his own. Just like that, the room was now left containing 3 breathing individuals instead of 8. Petrified and muddled, Big Fish rushed back to his office without uttering a single word. The 2 brothers followed suit. A violent and roaring sound was produced just moments after the duo reached the second level of the factory. This was X-Thieves bashing down the door to the office inside, which Big Fish was now making his seemingly last stand. Once the pair of brothers made their entrance inside the office, Big Fish initiated another exchange. Hey man, oh no, fuck you 2 suited up. Fed-looking motherfuckers are thinking busting up in here like that. I got no beef with you. Big Fish was shouting while his voice cracked intermittently, still residing in a complete state of domineering confusion. Shut the fuck up. Exive returned the favour by shouting himself while residing in the state of domineering agitation. This state was rather expected, however, as the artificial creation often would get this way if no drugs were administered into his system for an excessive time, and on this particular day. No drugs had entered XVI's bloodstream for over 3 hours. Quite the record this was for the cantankerous little rascal. I only got one very important question for you, pretty in blue. Mikolo continued while referencing the blue clothes that covered the youthful gangbanger. Do you have a cigarette? The younger Artifinoid inquired while sounding calmer than just moments prior, greatly emphasizing his inquiry. What?
More liquid of bewilderment was added to the bucket of incertitude that Big Fish found himself suddenly carrying.
You 2 crazy-ass, cracker motherfuckers came here just to ask me that? Nah, man, I don't fucking smoke. Big Fish concluded his shouting exhibition, remaining deeply distraught by this unannounced visit. Like a bull provoked by a toreador, Eckstein saw red after hearing this extremely unsatisfactory answer. The Artifinoid rushed Big Fish, with pure, unfiltered, and unadulterated rage guiding him. Big Fish was no small man, mind you, 6'6" if one had to make a guess, nearing 300 pounds even. This was perhaps why he received his nickname, after all. However, his gigantic stature meant rather little at this very moment, as XCII overpowered the man with ease, taking him down to the ground and progressing to bash his head in while blinded by fury. In between hits, the irate artificial creation yelled out, "You cocksucking motherfucking two-faced faggot piece of shit! You have guests showing up at your fucking door and you don't even have a fucking cigarette to fucking offer them," XE shouted, reaching glass-shattering volumes. The disintegration that the man's head went through was quite something else. The skull had been greatly compromised and was now caved in, with pieces of the brain becoming increasingly more visible after each strike. "What in the fuck is wrong with you? Answer me, you motherfucker." XTI continued his unrelenting assault alongside the deafening commentary. "He is dead, XThayon," XXV stated in a composed and cold tone which provided quite the sonic contrast to the perforating shouting that was taking place inside the office. "Dead?" Exekines exclaimed while taking a slight reprieve from the violence, as genuine shock had now perforated his unabashed realm of indignation. This surprise did not stay long, however, as XVII's anger had forced it out. Mykola Graylov returned to the salacious act of violence once more. "Did I give you permission to fucking die, you weak, inconsiderate, human piece of fucking dogfuck?" Increasingly incoherent the man was now becoming as he continued to assail the victim's cranium. "You die whenever the fuck I tell you to die! You fucking hear me?" the young artiphenoid yelled at a lifeless corpse with all his might. At this point of this lovely exchange, the gangster's head integrity was no longer, as the skull was now fully destroyed, with the pieces of encephalon scattered all over the floor of the office. Playing the role of a new carpet. "I really think you should calm down, XThayon," said XXV, while remaining under the spell of impenetrable composure. "I will not calm down until cocaine enters my fucking system," Excite shouted, providing a rapid response, having now finally concluded his vicious assault. "There is some in this room, brother," XXV stated while maneuvering himself towards the miniature safe located in the corner of the office. "It is most certainly inside this office." "Safe here, XThayon," XXV added, having now occupied a location directly adjacent to the small, yet well-crafted safe. "I do not know the combination, but I am sure I can crack it given some time." Anders finished the effort of trying to calm his rabid younger brother down. "No need," Exed said while recollecting himself as stability had finally made her long-awaited return. "This safe here, yeah?" He then inquired of XXV rhetorically, zeroing in on the safe much like a serpent on its prey. "Yes, XVII. It would not take me long to unlock it." Before Anders could finish his line of thought, however, his sibling took matters into his own hands. Once XThayon approached the safe, he ripped the door off the hinges with rage fueling him at every step. "Impressive display of strength, brother," XXV stated, while not only impressed but even uplifted by what he had just witnessed. "I always thought that we needed to do more strength testing with you back at the facility. But you refused so many sessions," Exekund interrupted XXV before he had the opportunity to finish yet again. "Yeah, I don't give a fuck about that shit right now." Mykola spoke with his mind and eyes fixated on the CHNO that was located inside the mini-safe, just as XXV had previously assumed. Sequaz removed the cocaine from the parameters of the safe and proceeded to rip the bag open sloppily and uncaringly before snorting the remaining contents of the plastic construct. "Much better. XT proclaimed, with relief overflowing him as he sat down in the chair belonging to the most recently departed. This bag of cocaine was not intended to be traded, as it contained just enough product suited for personal use. However, with the owner of the sugar bag no longer present among the living, Exathan most certainly did not let the bag go to waste. Before long, the Artifinoid finished the entirety of the plastic container. "Feeling better, brother?" XXV inquired with genuineness after witnessing his sibling devastate the snow-coloured substance. "Does the bear fuck in the woods?" XI replied instantaneously. A swing and a miss it was for the brazen one. "That's not quite how the maxim goes, XC." XXV responded in an instructive tone once again. "To answer your abstract inquiry, however, the bear most certainly would mate in the woods, and even defecate in it, as the expression goes." Professor Anders Greylove had provided his younger brother with yet another lesson, free of charge. "Yeah, whatever." Dismissive as per usual Miccolo was. "What do we do now, grizzly man?" He once again blasted the response out immediately, injecting sarcasm into the exchange regarding Bruins while referencing the one who was most enthused by the aforementioned creatures. "Well," XXV began to speak while taking a respite. "With the unfortunate and unforeseen passing of our friend Big Fish here, we find ourselves limited in the amount of information we could have gathered." XXV stopped to survey the office once more after his most recent sentiment. "However, not all is lost, as I am certain that much of the information we desire is contained on that computer nearest yourself, XVII. All I need is some time to hack into it." XXV was now fully done with his articulation as he closed the gap between himself and the aforementioned piece of technology, whilst listening to his brother was searching the drawers of the desk he now occupied with a clear objective in mind. "I knew that motherfucker was lying," Exthig shouted in elation once he saw a pack of cigarettes inside one of the drawers, succeeding in his task. After pulling the smokes out, Miccolo began to speak once again. "All right. I got a date with this pack of cigarettes. You got this shit covered from here, yeah?" he inquired shortly after beginning to denude the fresh container filled with the coffin nails. "Most certainly." The brothers had swapped places, with XXV now helming the wooden piece of furniture. "It should not take me long at all to hack into the computer. I will notify you once all is done." The masterly creation spoke, having already begun the process of hacking the technological wonder. "Adios," said Exthethanth, making his egress out of the office. Once, fully outside, the Artifinoid lit up the aforementioned cigarette, and after a brief, joyful moment to himself, he uttered, "I wonder what the twins are up to right now." Silence filled the air of the luxurious house that the 4 children and Dr. Gray were occupying, with only the resonance of the multiple ticking clocks spread throughout the estate, providing the quelling background noise. This delicate stillness would be punctured soon enough, however, as Ix was now heard calling out her brother's name. "Vi! Where in the hell are you, Vi?" the female Artifinoid shouted in hopes of locating her brother, who was seemingly lost within the confines of the mansion. Yet her efforts would be in vain, as the formidable acreage of the house devoured the woman's attempts to locate the young giant. "Damn it all to hell and back. Does this house have to be this big?" she muttered to herself, sounding defeated even. Despite this, the lady continued onwards to look for her brother, while visibly annoyed. Her brother was in fact lodged within the parameters of this sizable property, and was to be found inside the garage of the mansion, to be more specific. Vi very much enjoyed talking to those he deemed much smarter than himself, and as a result, he often conversed with Dr. Gray. Admittedly, Dr. Gray did not always desire such a partner for conversation, but he could never quite deny VE the opportunity. Gray, after all, loved all of his children no matter the circumstances. The two were amidst of having a discourse whilst just inside that garage. "I just wish I got a chance to get to know him better, you know." Vi spoke while conquered by a momentary state of sadness, tonally, as well as visually. "I understand fully," Sixth Dr. Gray responded with genuine compassion and understanding present. "But you must understand that Dr. Sokolov was quite the busy man, and one filled with overwhelming conviction. It would not be unfair to say that he only had the mind for his vision, and nothing more." The little doctor took a slight reprieve, during which he smiled at the young creation. "Of course, he did also have another side to him, one that you had not seen due to his passing, unfortunately." Dr. Gray concluded as the sadness that had already claimed Fikf now added yet another victim to her list. Gray, too, had suddenly been injected with a dose of despair while recollecting of his good friend. "Yeah, I just wish I could have gotten to know that side of him. I only knew the man as a scientist who administered tests on us, yet I still felt a connection to him." VI was now the one requiring the respite, which he utilized to recompose himself. "Much like the connection I feel to you," Lucas stated while desperately trying to remove the burdensome layer of dejection which he found himself buried under. "Anyway, do you think it's weird to have two dads, Dad?" Vi asked as his mood improved visibly. "Not at all." The doctor's response was sudden, yet uplifted, as he also began to escape this oppressive prison of desolation. "This is California, after all. It might soon be weird not to have two fathers." Dr. Gray answered with seriousness, despite the light-hearted comment. Vi laughed at the doctor's remark, but then shortly after, followed up with another inquest. "Do you think Exthakin will succeed in his efforts to take over the streets, Dad?" Vi inquired while eagerly anticipating the response of the doctor. Gray required some time to himself before he could provide an answer to the young Lucas. As this inquiry necessitated consideration, Exthai is an interesting and an unorthodox character. Sixth. That much is clear. Gray spoke judiciously while describing his first creation. However, within his DNA is implanted a parameter, a directive to gain control and achieve total dominance. This, of course, is very much the case for all of you, but with Exthai being the leader, I believe the desired end goal is highly achievable. Dr. Gray answered the young man with full sincerity and a grin for good measure. "But do you think his methods are moral?" Vi was unrelenting in his inquisition while optically fixated on the doctor. Marcus Gray once again required a moment before he could produce a proper response. "That is certainly an interesting question." The garb of deep deliberation the doctor wore while answering the big man. "You know, your other father had taught me something about morality, or at least an understanding of morality from his own perspective, and in truth it is something that I agree with." Dr. Gray took a reprieve in the midst of his response, after which he chose to continue to answer the question in a more subdued manner. "The reality is, V, that you should not concern yourself with morality, as it is entirely a human construct. This concept applies to humans and humans only. Not a single fair-minded soul would call a cheetah immoral for hunting its prey, or a computer program immoral for eliminating viruses." The doctor had stopped abruptly to observe Lucas and had discovered that the artiphenoid was radiating with discord. Shortly after that, the doctor resumed. "I understand that this might not be the response that you wanted to hear, but I very much side with your older brother XXV when it comes to this subject. Sixth, the human-made concept of morality will only complicate you and bring nothing of value in return. Dr. Gray concluded his lecture-like response with conviction present. VI, while now looking even more dejected than before, began to speak once again. XXV becomes so disappointed with me every time this very topic comes up. VI's words carried quite the tone of devastation. I love all my siblings to death, but I just can't help it. I don't feel the same way as my other siblings, Father. I don't see things the same way as them, especially when it comes to XTI. Tvi finished the sentiment with his head completely down. Dr. Gray chuckled, trying to elevate the mood of the young man. You aren't cut from the same cloth as them, as they say, Gray said while turning away from V to continue his work, but retaining the compassion amidst his words. This is what makes you unique among the bunch, so I wouldn't get too down over the fact if I were you, Lucas. Gray finished with a sentiment of encouragement with genuine sympathy backing those very words up. VI was visibly uplifted by Gray's remarks, as the doctor's Catholicon seemed to have been efficacious. In fact, a smile, finally, started to form on the face of the giant once again. Thanks, Dr. Gray. I really mean that, Vi said, with now a fully formed smile painted across his face and a much elated voice. Any time.
The doctor responded swiftly while fully enveloped in his work inside the garage.
Before the conversation had a chance to continue, though, IX finally located her brother. Finally, I have been looking all over for you, X stated with a sense of relief coating her words. We need to go over the presentation that XXV had sent. Sixth, don't you remember? The woman spoke in a stringent and scholarly tone. I do remember, I just don't want to. Between a child and the artiphenoid, there wasn't much of a difference on this occasion, as Vi provided his response. They are so boring and take like 5 million years to finish. Travelling to the moon takes less time than one of those presentations. Can we just watch a Christina Aguilera concert instead and call it good? Vi genuinely inquired of IX, albeit he most certainly already knew the answer. I am going to pretend that I didn't hear that, Buzz Aldrin, X stated while the hardness in her voice now amplified. This infiltration is extremely important. We can't mess this up, brother. She concluded her adjuration. I know. Though I don't know why you can't just say the word fuck. It's not that bad, is it? Vi asked her sister with slight fast present, while now beginning to rise to his feet in order to accommodate his siblings' commands. Get your butt to the study right now. Sixth Linangs was talking in a respectful tone despite her patience audibly attenuating. Fine, I am going. Vi conceded and proceeded to make his way upstairs towards the study room. The only two left inside the garage now were Dr. Gray and IX, and this served as the foundation to a rather unusual exchange. Dr. Gray. The beauty spoke as complete neutrality blanketed her. Alex, Nin, Goddy. Gray struggled greatly to complete his sentence, a rather common sight this. I will be going now, Dr. Gray, X said without any changes to her tone, while starting to make her way out of the garage and to the study, where Vi was already patiently waiting. With Xthayan still outside, nearest the factory, decimating the newly found pack of cigarettes. XXV was now finished hacking into the dead man's computer in order to acquire the information needed for the duo to progress further with their initiative. This very task was not an onerous one, as XXV had not yet faced a terminal he could not conquer. The masterful creation's talents ran quite the impressive gamut, and ranged anywhere from medicine to engineering to even hacking, as it was necessary in this specific instance. One could say that XXV was a Swiss army knife of sorts. Forgive the pun. The artifinoid amassed his belongings and started to make his way back to X. Once outside, Anders began to address his sibling. "We will require a lawyer if we are to continue forward down this path, XXV," XXV said while nearing XThatomth, whose back was still turned away from his older brother. "Why? Did you accidentally download something you shouldn't have when on that computer upstairs?" Mikolo said playfully in between, taking heavy drags of the cigarette. "Not quite, XXV answered his brother in an instant, disregarding the joke altogether, whilst now starting to move towards his younger sibling. "We will need a criminal lawyer to be more specific," the artifinoid concluded, still in motion. "Well, obviously." Xtheons took a slight break from the drags in order to chuckle to himself. "Lawyers deal with criminals all the time. It's their job. A pretty dumb thing to say, considering it's coming out of you, isn't it?" XXV? Sex spoke with his back, still directed away from XXV, having now begun the process of removing yet another fag from the nearly finished package. "I'm afraid you didn't quite understand, XThive," XXV responded with quickness, yet no fluctuation in voice. "We will need a criminal lawyer." Anders Greylove finished, having finally concluded his short voyage, as he now found himself standing directly adjacent to his brother. "Oh, I get it. I should have gotten it the first time, for fuck's sake." Tech Eyes sounded quite agitated and disappointed with himself while lighting up one of the last cigarettes. "This is his card right here, XThive," XXV stated after pulling out the card without even glancing over at his sibling, while both creations stood there, staring into the grand, cold distance. "It has the address of his office on it. I think you should go and speak to him today. We may need to use his services very soon, in fact."
XXV spoke, instructing the younger one.
"I have been in contact with him before, so he will be expecting you. He is quite the capable lawyer, brother. I believe he can be of extreme use to the family." Anders was now finished with his instructions. "And you want me to talk to him 10 to 10? He asked his brother after having fully lit up the cigarette, taking his first inhale. Another blunder by the bold creation this was, however. In his defence, you miss every shot you don't take, as they say. But then, of course, you also often miss the shots you do take as well. It's TTXF, not 10 to 10, XXV said with no malice or mockery present, while correcting his rather rash sibling. "Yeah, all right." Mikolo was quick to address XXV's amendment with annoyance inserted, but anger removed. "Thanks for the English lesson, Professor." Minor ridicule had now joined the annoyance within his voice. "It is actually French," XThescend. "The proverb has its roots somewhere in the early 1700s. Before Anders was able to finish yet another lesson, Mikolo interrupted, no longer possessing the capability of tolerating the lecture. All right, he spat out with the haste of a runaway train. "Give me that fucking card so that I can go and talk to that damn lawyer of yours." Mikolo spoke with vexation now beginning to leave him. "I am sure he will try to give me a lesson in math or some shit like that." He then muttered to himself as jest slowly supplanted the agitation. XXV had, of course, heard his brother's comment, but opted to offer no rebuke. "Contact me once you two are finished with your meeting, XThi," XXV added while observing his brother as he neared the car. "Will do, father." Chexian's tone was filled with sham once more, having nearly made his entry inside the automobile. Edward Adam Shapiro was a lawyer in his 30s and had just been recently nearly disbarred due to some rather unconventional practices, if you will. He was a man of average size with curly, brown hair and brown eyes. Mr. Shapiro had established quite the dangerous connections as he was deeply involved in criminal activity. Some of his clients included higher-ups in the mafia, gangs, and even the cartel. The lawyer would commonly perform many under-the-table deals and would often cover up tracks that could otherwise lead to the demise of the above-mentioned individuals. He was in knee-deep, and as is usually the case, the lawyer was in for a rude awakening. Shapiro was eventually exposed. However, using the last of his connections, Edward was able to guarantee himself not only his freedom, but even the preservation of his license. Despite this, he was released from the firm, lost most of his connections, and had his name dragged through quite the unprecedented amount of mud. Nobody was willing to work with Mr. Shapiro any longer once the truth surfaced. The lawyer found himself in a deep hole of desperation and was in dire need to recover himself not just monetarily, but also spiritually. Mr. Shapiro was spiraling down indeed, but luck herself would show the infrequent smile to the lawyer as Mr. Shapiro met Anders Greylove, and the two had worked out quite the deal. And this was the stepping stone to Edward's recovery. The lawyer seemingly was once again back in the rotation with a new and highly promising client. Shapiro was found in his new, much reduced and degraded office, anticipating the arrival of Greylove. In a compact strip mall near the Midtown area of Los Angeles, Shapiro's office was located. In fact, his office was ultimately the only operation just inside those walls that was still running, as the economic hardship that devoured the city had claimed many businesses. Shapiro's office was indeed modest, however. It was not without its charm, as the practitioner had many traditional rugs covering the floor and even dressing the walls. 2 old-fashioned lamps occupied the corners of the office to accompany the main source of light coming from the ceiling. In the space between the 2 instruments of illumination was positioned a liquor cabinet, and while this ligneous creation hardly possessed any noteworthy traits, the alcohol inside it was an entirely different story. Across the fancy spirits stood a desk, while a bookshelf occupied the space behind, which was filled with mostly law-related writings, and some fiction as well. The desk itself, however, was well-crafted, seemingly made out of the luxuriant and sturdy material that is maple wood. Incidentally, the door was made out of that same exact matter, and even more incidentally, it stood no chance as Exthine suddenly barged through it, much like a SWAT team would. Jesus Christ! What is this? Is this a raid? The lawyer torpedoed a string of questions while infected with grave anxiety. I promise I only helped a single child pornographer, and he did not share any of his material with me. The man's voice was overfilled with concern as he spat out this remark. Wait, you aren't the authorities. After taking more time to scan the unexpected arrival, the lawyer now began talking in a more collected tone. No shit. XVII's response was wrapped in hardiness. Aren't you going to offer me a fucking drink? The insolent Artifinoid offered up an inquiry of his own while retaining the rigidity rounding his words. You are Mr. Greylove. The sense of relief inside the professional's voice reverberated within the walls of the Bijou office. Of course, and oh yes, forgive my manners. I don't know where they have gone, the lawyer said as he rose to his feet and headed towards the modest liquor cabinet with intent. What would you prefer to drink, Mr. Greylove? He inquired with a newly found interest and a welcoming tone. Alcohol. Short and to the point, XVII's response was. Mikolo did not have a preference when it came to the cho. As long as it was flammable and carried an intoxicating effect, it met the required qualifications to enter the Artifinoid system. Yes, of course, the lawyer said while pulling out a bottle of scotch. He then took out 2 ornate glasses, filled them both to the brim and brought them, alongside the bottle, to the table. Once this errand was finished, however, and after Edward had once again turned around to face the direction of the desk, he noticed that Exthea was now sitting in his own chair. Not willing to cause any unnecessary tension, Shapiro chose to simply position himself in the client chair instead. Sextheans had proceeded to lift his feet up on the table while lighting a cigarette. The lawyer would have preferred no smoking while inside the office space, but once again refrained from commenting. "Give me the bottle." Miccolo commanded Edward Shapiro in his typical tone, inhabiting a state of great relaxation. "I poured the glasses already." The lawyer spoke in a faltering voice as he glanced at the works of glass. "But here it is, Mr. Greylove." Shapiro forfeited shortly after, relinquishing his possession of the glass container. "So, my brother said that you can be of great assistance to our operation." Stowans spoke in between huge gulps of the scotch. The artifinoid had not located an ashtray, so instead he shook off the cigarette residue on the floor. The lawyer once again provided no reproof. "Yes, Mr. Anders and I had discussed quite the opportunities." Edward was not quite able to finish his response as Sexthea interrupted him. "You Jewish? I don't want no rubbish here," Miccolo asked with no contempt amidst his words, whilst paying attention to the cigarette and not the advocate. "Yes, Mr. Greylove." The man was now speaking with a rather delighted voice. "I am a man of Russian Jewish ancestry. My grandfather came to this country while trying to escape the Soviet regime." The attorney spoke informatively. "I am a Jew to the bone, although that came out sounding a little wrong, actually." The man's delight was no longer, as he processed what he just recently stated while pointing his head down on the ground for a brief moment. "Good." Exthecand interrupted once more, not willing to hear any more babble coming out of the lawyer's mouth. "So, what you got for me?" he inquired, having now finished his cancer stick. "Well, Mr. Greylove," the attorney's words resonated with eagerness and pride, "I still have some very powerful connections, and am more than capable of doing any bookkeeping and handling of finances, alongside, of course, some creative accounting should that be needed. I believe I am more than capable of aiding your operation, which Mr. Anders assured me is quite significant." Edward Shapiro paused and took some time to glance at XVII. Exthecand himself was not speaking, choosing instead to keep drinking the scotch. The lawyer took this opportunity to continue his boastful monologue. "As a matter of fact, Mr. Greylove, I know for certain that there will be a drop-off coming up very soon between the 2 local gangs. It will be cash for drugs, a straight trade, you see." Once the attorney had finished, Miccolo started to form a smile on his face immediately after hearing just this information. "Is that right now?" Exthec said rhetorically, with his gaze glued to the wall and the grin still at hand. "It most certainly is, Mr. Greylove," Shapiro answered with pride still at his side. "All right then, chapstick." Exthecand had begun his response, but was interrupted by the attorney. "How the tables have turned, indeed. It's actually Shapiro, Mr. Greylove," Edward said with respect despite the most recent interruption, while a smile escorted his rectification. Exthea remained silent, and chose to stare the lawyer down instead with a look of considerable intensity and even some distaste. The creation hardly appreciated being interrupted. Much like before, the legal practitioner picked up on this quickly and proceeded to alleviate the tension. "But chapstick is fine too. It's new. You know, it's different," Shapiro added while sounding surmounted. "As I was saying," Stowans continued while rising to his feet, having now finished the entirety of the scotch bottle. "We can make a deal here, my brother will contact you, and the two of you can exchange the details of that trade that you mentioned, alongside any other business. Miccolo had made it all the way to the door, leading out of the office before stopping and making another remark. "I am going to take these 2 bottles with me," Jake said while staring down the liquor cabinet, choosing his options. "Those are very expensive." The lawyer once again witnessed the Artifinoid's gaze, drilling him much like moments prior. "But you should take them to seal the new partnership," Edward said with a fake smile and a tone of concession once again. "Oh, Mr. Greylove, before you leave." Shapiro caught ex-thief at the very last moment, with most of his body already on the other side of the doorframe. "Yes, what is it, chopsticks?" the impatient creation asked the attorney with a hint of annoyance. "There is this new player in town, and he has been causing quite a lot of problems for the gangs and even the cartel," the practitioner said while relocating back to his recently liberated chair. "They call him the White Devil, though I really don't know what that means, but it could be an issue for us." Edward finished, having now settled inside his seat once more. "Don't worry, lawyer," Axion said with a grin. "The White Devil will not cause us any problems." He then progressed out of Shapiro's office immediately after his most recent remark. "I trust you, Mr. Greylove," stated the lawyer sincerely, with now only himself in the room to hear it. "I trust you fully." Chapter 6. 2. A Devil is Born, Mr. Douglas. A whole day had passed since Shapiro and Skechan's meeting had taken place, and a new business partnership was seemingly formed. Now, it does have to be mentioned that Edward Shapiro never intended to leave the hemisphere of crime, if you will, as his desire was rediscovery of oneself just within that ecosystem. As you see, Mr. Shapiro was able to establish quite the fortune prior to the exposure which led to his eventual downfall. Although Mr. Shapiro was a loyal man, he was not a very forgiving one. Edward Shapiro promised himself that he would have his revenge on those who had exposed him in the first place at any cost. On this warm and sunny day, it was now XXV who found himself inside the ambitious lawyer's office. "The final drop-off will be here, Mr. Greylove, and you can trust this information fully. My informant does not get these kinds of things wrong," said the lawyer with a blinding smile on his face and piercing satisfaction in his voice while circling the location on the map. "Yes, I trust you in this matter." XXV's tone was colder than the Antarctic winter itself, as per usual. "The last tip you gave us was right on spot, after all," he added, having now begun the process of transferring the freshly disclosed information onto his laptop. "You know, Mr. Greylove," the attorney stated with lure, as he abdicated his throne and motioned towards the liquor cabinet, "I'm not exactly sure if this is your wheelhouse here, but I do have some very vital information concerning certain bank account numbers from one of my past clients. They contain large sums of money," said the lawyer with slight distaste, while now opening the doors to the aforementioned wooden construction. XXV, as usual, picked up on this right away. "I sense quite the hostility in your voice, Mr. Shapiro. Is this a personal vendetta?" the Artifinoid inquired on the lawyer, reciprocating the lure. "Yes, Mr. Greylove. I won't lie to you." Shapiro was vigilantly attempting to locate just the right spirit while talking to Anders Greylove. "Douglas is one of the men who was responsible for my downfall, you see. But this really is a killing 2 birds with 1 stone situation here," said the lawyer, while starting to pour himself a drink after finally locating the correct one. "Would you like one, Mr. Greylove?" Edward genuinely inquired after filling 1 glass to full. "I don't drink, Mr. Shapiro," XXV responded instantly and genuinely. "Very well then." The lawyer put the brakes on his proposal to taste the freshly poured liquor. After taking a slight sip, the attorney continued on. Mr. Douglas and his other business partners keep a sizable chunk of their wealth in certain elusive overseas accounts, as they tend to often operate outside of the law themselves. If the money were to disappear, it would be extremely difficult and honestly impossible to track down if the right person was handling the transfer. Shapiro spoke while clearly alluding to himself. It was designed this way on purpose, due to the illegal side of things, you know. Anyway, Mr. Greylove, I, of course, do not know the account numbers, but if we were to acquire them, believe you me, Mr. Greylove, we would make out like bandits. The lawyer finished his lengthy proposition alongside half of his fancy drink. XXV was an expert at reading people, and he knew that Shapiro was 100% sincere while voicing his bid. This was all that he needed in order to agree to the proposed deal. "How much of a cut would you prefer, Mr. Shapiro?" XXV asked while no longer on the laptop, having now finished the transfer. "Oh, Mr. Greylove, that would be up to your organization entirely," said the lawyer, trying his best to depress his ego and to sound modest instead. "I know I am new here, so I don't have much authority to demonstrate." Shapiro concluded, succeeding in his attempt to demonstrate humility. "Very well, Mr. Shapiro, send me all the information you have on this Douglas, and I will mention this to my employer," XXV said as he started to get ready to leave the office, while fully aware of the personal stake with the flavour of revenge that the attorney had invested within this request. "Most certainly, Mr. Greylove, but there is one more thing that I wanted to ask you." The lawyer stood up to accompany XXV as he was leaving. "I hope you forgive my curiosity, but do yourself and the gentleman I met yesterday work for the White Devil?" he inquired with genuine and almost childlike interest. "That's a question better suited for the White Devil himself, I am afraid, Mr. Shapiro," XXV said while nearly out of the office. "After all, you had the opportunity to ask him that yourself last night when you first met him." Anders produced a slight smile after this remark.
"Good evening, Mr. Shapiro."
The Artifinoid had now left the office. The lawyer's face was overrun with puzzlement and a hint of fear as he sat back down and resumed the ingestion of the liquid courage. "Tetrahydro—" "What?" Vi exclaimed with irritation and confusion, irrefusion if you will. "Tetrahydrocannabinol," 6th answered with conviction and sensitivity, convertivity if you will. "But the name isn't as important as its application. So just make sure to remember that part, you understand, sweetie?" Ike's asked her confused and mentally drained brother, much like a mother would when relaying important life advice onto her child. "How come these names can't be in English?" Vi asked yet another question, sounding worn out. "They are in English, cutie pie." Ike's responded instantaneously with a soft tone still very much at her side. "This is the second day of this, and I still don't understand it." Defeated, Forsyth stated, but before the encumbered Artifanoid had an opportunity to continue. A third voice joined the conversation unexpectedly. "Don't worry about it. I don't ever understand any of this. Bullshit either," proclaimed XTN once he fully entered the study room, having just recently arrived at the mansion from the attorney's office. Psy was visibly uplifted by the sight of his older brother. "X, you are back." V sounded like a child seeing his dad on this occasion. "You guys were gone for so long, I was beginning to worry." The genuine Lucas once again spoke while elated. "Oh, that's sweet." 6th Mikolo responded with slight ridicule present, yet with no malice to observe. "We were working on some expansion while you learned about Tetris Cannonball or whatever over here." Xeka and Al spoke in full jest, admittedly not knowing the correct pronunciation himself neither. It's tetrahydrocannabinol. Ix intervened, leaving the loving tone behind and trading it for one of a consummate instructor. How come nobody can get that name down? Alexandra inquired while gradually becoming trivially flustered. Probably because it's not in English. Extheine answered swiftly as Vi began smiling at his brother's remark. It is in few. It is in English. XVII. Ix responded, while fluctuating in tones with frustration, not quite willing to let Ix go from her heady clutch. Speaking of English, where is Grey at? Exeath asked, steering the conversation entirely from the wonderful science that is chemistry. I got a message from him. He said he wanted to talk to me. He appended, beginning to look for a cigarette, unsuccessfully, one should add. Wait, how are those two connected? Confusion overwhelmed V when he asked his two siblings, adding to the already antecedent foundation of bewilderment that the science presentation had just recently constructed. We all speak English here. I don't get it. He concluded while sounding just as sapped and perplexed as before, perplexed, if you will. It's because he is actually from England, Sixth Arnang explained to her brother, returning to the warm and mother-like tone. Oh yeah, obviously, Vi exclaimed. I am so stupid. No. Wonder I cannot remember tetrahedron. Vi had brought his head down, dissatisfied with himself. Ix had mimicked her brother's head motion while experiencing the same emotional response as her brother as well, having disappointment now enter her mental state. Oh, it's tetra-freaking hydrocannabinol, Ix stated, having entirely too many inadequate brothers to correct inside the room, and Dr. Grey is in the garage, as always, XVII. Alexandra added while lifting her head back up to look at the duo of grand duds. That's where I am heading then, said Extheant, while starting to head towards the garage, having now brought Veith the much-needed intermission from the draconian lesson he was receiving. Have fun with your THC. With the family being new arrivals to the United States, an effective restart of the artificial creation program was required as all of the previous work had been destroyed. Alongside the facility back in Slovenia, Steyal's efforts concentrated entirely on the streets themselves, and he had made quite the strides in this very endeavour. In a rather short time, the youthful Artifinoid was able to take control of many territories, deposing all who stood in his way in the most punishing of manners. While Mikolo Greylov was concerned with the streets, Dr. Grey was left to devise and formulate when it came to re-establishing the creation program. Since he was the only remaining doctor left alive from the prior effort in Europe, XDI, XXV, and Grey himself would often meet up to discuss potential prospects concerning this very effort. Stachyon arrived at the garage to discuss just such a matter. Grey? Grey, you over here? Ixthar shouted in a disenchanted voice while lighting yet another cigarette after finally succeeding in locating one. Guess not, then, Mikolo muttered to himself after spending a considerable amount of time without a response from Grey, while of course smoking the prior mentioned. I am here, X. Grey finally responded, having utilised the same entrance as the Artifinoid himself had done just moments before. For once, the good doctor was not within the parameters of the garage. I was occupied in the other room and just barely heard you. How are your efforts on the streets going? Marcus asked his creation, nearing his desk inside the spacious locale to regain control of his most archetypal venue of the house, if you will. It is fine, Doc, Thicane rapidly answered, maintaining the disillusioned tone. You got something for me? He resumed with an inquiry, whilst repositioning himself within the location, approaching the first seat he spotted. Yes, well, Gray began his proposal while fully expectant of XVII's professional demeanour as the Artifinoid got straight down to business. As you know, XVII, it is hardly easy doing all the artificial creation-related work by oneself, and while XXV is of great help, he is seldom available since you keep him busy with the streets. The doctor took a slight reprieve. The doctor began pacing around the garage with one hand behind his back and the other one gesticulating while discussing the affair with the artificial humanoid. What I am saying is that I desire a partner, XVII. The little scientist concluded with his back turned away from XVII. Why, sexually? You getting a little lonely inside this here garage, Doc? X-Factor spoke, poking at his father and his aberrant sexual nature. Yes, that's very funny, X-Thamv. While Gray was certainly dismissive of his creation's most recent remark, he did find some amusement within the comment. The doctor could not help but to chuckle to himself ever so slightly. I am afraid I desire a business partner, X-the-Cytund, an assistant, and XXV was gracious enough to provide a perfect candidate. Marcus Gray concluded while once again facing the Artifinoid. Go on. Xionth kept the exchange afloat. Inside a boat made out of the material of anticipation. His name is Jonathan Kaiser Strauss, X. He is quite the capable surgeon, one of the best in the profession in fact, but long story short, he is no longer a part of that profession due to some rather unfortunate events. Dr. Gray took one more respite before continuing, as he now found himself resembling a professor in tone while relaying the information onto his son. At any rate, X-Theand. Dr. Strauss is an interesting character and is perfect for the operation we have going on here. I fear my efforts of convincing him will not suffice as UXVII are much better at convincing others. Gray finished the sentiment while looking away from Mikolo, with the implication behind his statement being as clear as smoked glass. You want me to kidnap him, then? Xionth asked bluntly, looking through the smoked glass. Well, kidnap is such an ugly word. X. The doctor continued with the professorial tone. I want you to bring him into the operation. I could very much use the help, and I would be extremely appreciative, X-Theide. Gray now stood near the Artifinoid as he finished his lengthy proposition. All right, Gray, I will go and kidnap this Strauss, said the artificial one, starting to make his exit out of the garage immediately after the agreement was made. Send me all the info you have on him, Gray. The creation added while in motion out of the garage. Already have. XD, the doctor said with a smile and relief as he observed X-Thekind leaving the garage. Once the doctor finished optically escorting the artificial humanoid out of the vicinity, he went back to his bench to resume his dearest activity. While the three children were occupying the house, XXV was out surveying and planning for the next mission. The infiltration of Mr. Douglas's home was not going to be a difficult task, but that mattered little to someone like XXV. A master tactician, every single detail had to be perfect as he was meticulous and patient. And as Greylove trusted the lawyer and the info he had provided, and was willing to invest himself into this matter fully. The Artifinoid spent a considerable amount of time scouting the target while learning everything about his movement. Once all was ready, XXV would phone his younger brother, X-Thehamv. The two consistently kept communication with one another via mobile, and this was their discussion leading up to the Douglas mission. XXV, what you got for me? X-Thai had asked with intrigue after answering his brother's phone call in a heartbeat. It appears we are in luck, X-Thai. XXV responded, matching the quickness of his brother. Mr. Douglas is occupying a rather remote location currently. He and his family are resting inside of a vacation home on the outskirts of the city with nobody guarding them. This is the perfect opportunity to strike. Additionally, I have been able to locate Dr. Strauss as well, and it was a hardly difficult task. Jonathan Strauss can be located and confronted at his house since he spends most of his time there. The surgeon lives alone. It is up to you to decide who we go after first, brother. XXV concluded his presentation. XVI required some time to ruminate over the two enticing propositions, but did eventually provide a response. Gray can wait. We hit Douglas first. A marvellously crafted, mostly wooden house captured the two brothers' attention once they finally did arrive at their destination. This was a multi-storied home at that. The location was surrounded by fencing. However, it served a mostly aesthetic purpose rather than a practical one. Behind the building there was a shed and even a small garden with a quaint greenhouse. One needed quite the income to afford such a place, and Douglas surely had the required funds. Benjamin Douglas was a very successful businessman who had his roots in energy development. However, as the man's accomplishments just within this field soared, so did his ambitions. Douglas began to quickly expand his business ventures, elevating them to a much greater scope. As the man's influence increased, his social circle would follow the same path. Throughout his career, Douglas made many connections, some of which were rather atypical, as one would say. He had made deals with the cartel and mafia, and this was the reason behind Douglas's desire to acquire the services of Mr. Shapiro in the first place. This was how the two began their business relationship which seemed to be going swimmingly up, until a scenario of betrayal played out. Douglas, alongside his other partners, threw Mr. Shapiro under the proverbial bus to guarantee the survival of their own reputations once the push most assuredly came to shove. This was how their relationship had met its rather tragic end. Douglas knew not about the lawyer's plan for revenge, however, and was definitely not prepared for what was about to commence on this particular night. The night on which Douglas was driving back to the summer home to reunite with his family. This home was truly a great getaway place. Nevertheless, sometimes a getaway place can become something much more foreboding. The two brothers patiently sat in the shadows, anticipating the return of the man of the house. And as the evening began to intensify, Douglas had finally made his return. There he is, XV. That right there is Benjamin Douglas, XXV said, while directing his sibling's vision towards the man. X-time, without saying a single word, egressed the car and started to near Douglas's automobile instead. Douglas was caught up doing something inside the cabin and did not exit the vehicle right as he parked. This gave the artiphenoid ample time to ambush him. XVI, I approached the car from the side, elbowed the window glass, shattering it with ease, and ripped the door cleanly off. Douglas started to make some remarks while frightened, but his attacker did not have an ear for any of them. XVI, I grabbed Douglas by his clothing and removed him from the car with such force that the seatbelt, which Douglas hadn't yet unbuckled, was torn from the mechanism at the base. Douglas suddenly found himself on the ground with yet another man towering over him. This was XXV. Shortly after the two had made eye contact, XXV began to speak. "Nice to finally meet your acquaintance, Mr. Douglas." The man had stated with a tone of surprising sincerity. Douglas was about to return the favour by producing a response, but that was not to be, as XVI quickly knocked him out cold with a single blow. "Mr. Douglas? Mr. Douglas, are you awake now, Mr. Douglas?" said XXV while noticing Douglas was finally beginning to regain consciousness inside a small room located on the top floor of this extravagant home. The room itself barely had any furnishings and had been clearly utilized as auxiliary storage space. Douglas, as a result of the prior assault, was still rather confused and had great difficulty responding at that very moment. XXV noticed just that and proceeded to resume speaking himself. "That's okay, Mr. Douglas. I understand that you were hit pretty hard, but it is extremely important that you comprehend the words I am about to tell you." XXV was sounding like a professor as he talked to Benjamin, while the solemnness injected into the artificial creation's words resembled one of an admiral giving orders to his subordinates. "I realize that our presence inside your house might bring a great deal of confusion to you, but we are here for a rather simple reason. We require information, Mr. Douglas. We require the overseas bank account numbers that you and your other business partners possess." After finishing this sentence, XXV showed Douglas the names of all of his partners and other information, including the bank names themselves. "These overseas accounts here, Mr. Douglas, is what our presence here demands." Benjamin was now starting to return to a more normal state and was capable of speaking fluently once again. "I would not know anything about that. I don't have knowledge of other people's information," Douglas said with his voice still weak and wrapped in a profuse layer of anxiety. "Yes, Mr. Douglas," XXV had continued with the tonality of understanding. "I realize that this would most certainly be the case typically. However, we do know that these accounts are set up with a specific function in mind and are shared because of this. Mr. Douglas, we are fully aware of the shady dealings you and your partners involved yourselves with." XXV had now returned to his frigid and instructive tone. "You needn't make this any more difficult than it already is, Mr. Douglas. You now know what we need in order for us to leave you alone." Anders genuinely admonished the man, with no sense of threat present amidst his words. "I told you to. I don't have that kind of information," Douglas said while looking at the floor, having begun to obtain a much-needed dosage of firmness. "I can sense when you are lying, Mr. Douglas." XXV's statement of admonishment had now become painted with a coat of commination. "This is hardly a smart idea." The creation's words reverberated throughout the tiny room as the menace within just those warnings had greatly escalated. "I tell you again, I don't have access to that kind of information." Douglas doubled down while emphasizing the latter part of his answer. Douglas knew too well just how much money was inside those overseas accounts and had made a bold effort to retain the mask of secrecy over them. How much is the price for avarice? One might just find this question most pressing. Stay tuned for the answer, friends. "Fuck this!" XXV burst out suddenly, with wrath sundering the relative serenity that had dominated the room prior. Shortly after this remark, Mikolo stormed out of the room where Douglas was being kept at. Once the two brothers made their entrance into this wonderful summer home, XXV was responsible for taking care of Douglas, while Xthakanth took it upon himself to subdue the remainder of the family that was occupying the house. The two remaining members of the family were Douglas's wife and daughter, and they both had been stationed in the living room while tied up and gagged. Sasai was not a man of great patience and possessed even less compassion. The resistance that Douglas showed in the dinky room upstairs angered the Artiphenoid down to the core. The Artiphenoid's blood boiled as he acquired a knife from the kitchen and then proceeded to make his return inside the living room to introduce himself to the two women of the household. The wife's name was Victoria, and she was around the age of 38 if one had to venture a guess. The woman was of a petite physique with bright red hair and enchanting green eyes, which made her appearance quite rare, in fact. She was once involved in the domain of business herself while working under Douglas, filling the role of a financial advisor in one of his firms. This is how the two met in the first place. Their daughter was named Violet and had just recently turned 19. While having a very similar figure to her mother's, she had ocean blue eyes and brown hair to accompany it all. The young lady was enrolled in a highly prestigious university, beginning her second year of the medical program, striving to become a doctor. Both of the women were stunning, to be blunt, however. That meant less than nothing to someone like Exthianthe. Now, one might not be familiar with the female anatomy, or might just simply require a refresher, if you will, as this very notion is rather pertinent. There is, of course, the labia majora, rounding the female sexual organ, followed shortly by the layer of labia minora. Then there is the opening of the vagina, and the opening of the urethra, with the clitoris topping and the hymen bottoming the two apertures. The next piece of this picture is the perineum, which of course separates the whole assembly from the anus. Needless to state, this entire area is quite sensitive. All of this is not to say that Exthianthe was an expert within the field of female anatomy, however, as very little expertise was required once the operation had commenced. Exthianthe, having the kitchen knife firmly in his possession, inserted it into the opening of the wife's vagina, twisting it shortly after to give himself more room for the procedure, so to say. At first, the artiphenoid had only slotted the tip of the knife, as he wanted to start slowly, since this was the very first time that the two had been intimate. However, briefly after the insertion, Mikollo repeated the act, only this time applying much more force while sliding the knife in halfway, and yes, of course, he twisted it once more for good measure. The screams of the woman resembled an animal at night time, as they were rather disquieting. Nonetheless, Exthianthe's laughter was at times reaching the volume levels much more thunderous than the cries of the woman even, as he now began to slide the knife in and out with blazing speeds, while manoeuvring the blade inside, achieving contact with both the clitoris and the hymen. Victoria's wails of agony fueled Exthianthe's gratification, as it was quite the beautiful symphony to the ears of the contemptuous sadist. Additionally, this act provided him with the panacea for the defiance of her husband, the affliction which had left the young creation in a position of grand rancour. The living room became one filled with great suffering and great joy simultaneously. After the man's lust was fully satiated, Exthianthe removed the knife from the woman's vagina, placed it against the perineum, and proceeded to gently scrape it over the skin while elevating it towards the anus. The woman was, of course, bent over during this whole procedure, one should add. Once the distance between the vagina and the anus had been covered, and the destination had been reached as it may, Exthianthe progressed to viciously insert the knife into the anus of the gorgeous, yet unfortunate woman. Mikollo had entered raw, as many so often say. The little amount of life that had still occupied the little woman's body had now vacated her anatomy entirely. The woman expired during the act of this rather unconventional anal penetration. Exthianthe, upon reaching the realization of the wife's passing, had withdrawn his assault, and began to remove the blade from the anus in its totality. Once liberated from the woman's rectum, the cutter was now stained not only with blood, but fecal matter as well, with a combination of two substances mixing together to manifest quite the artistic pattern. Exthians had now directed his undivided attention towards the daughter of the family, who had been utterly subjugated by fear, with the prison bars of despair erected around her. Whilst the young lady was inundated with dread, she knew all too well what the nearest future had in store for her, as Exthii drew up quite the deranged smile. With his eyes intensely scouring the would-be doctor, with one woman already having received the great privilege, soon both would have had the grand honour of being blessed by the devil himself. Exthii had closed the gap that was separating the two, as this was the last bastion of safety left for the hapless, smashing young lady. With the distance no longer a barrier, Exthii progressed to perform the same exact.